The story of Anne Frank cannot be understood without first placing it within the larger and darker context of World War II and the Holocaust. The war began in 1939 when Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland, prompting Britain and France to declare war. What followed was a conflict that spanned continents and engulfed much of the world, bringing with it unprecedented destruction and loss of life. Central to Nazi ideology was an intense and systematic anti-Semitism, which sought to eliminate Jewish people entirely from Europe through persecution, deportation, and ultimately, mass murder. This genocidal campaign became known as the Holocaust, and it claimed the lives of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. Anne Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany, into a Jewish family. Her father, Otto Frank, was a businessman, and her mother, Edith Frank, was a devoted homemaker. Anne had an older sister named Margot, and together they enjoyed a relatively comfortable life in the years before Adolf Hitler's rise to power. However, in 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, anti-Semitic laws and policies began to strip Jewish people of their rights. Life for Jewish families quickly became dangerous, and Otto Frank recognized that the situation would only grow worse. Seeking safety, the family decided to leave Germany and start a new life in the Netherlands, a country that was, at the time, known for its relative tolerance and stability. Settling in Amsterdam in 1934, the Frank family initially felt relief and hope for a peaceful life. Anne attended the Montessori school, made friends, and learned Dutch, adapting quickly to her new surroundings. Otto Frank worked to establish a business, and life seemed to regain a sense of normalcy. For several years, the Netherlands remained untouched by the war that raged elsewhere in Europe. However, that fragile sense of security would not last. On May 10, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. Within days, the Dutch military was forced to surrender, and the German occupation began. This marked the beginning of a period of harsh restrictions and fear for the Jewish population. Anti-Semitic laws were introduced systematically. Jewish people were banned from certain professions, forced to attend separate schools, and made to register their identities. They were also compelled to wear yellow Star of David badges on their clothing to mark them publicly as Jewish. These laws were not only humiliating, but also served as a means of isolation, making Jewish citizens easy to identify and target. For Anne Frank and her family, the reality of life under Nazi occupation became increasingly dangerous. In 1942, the Nazi regime began large-scale deportations of Jewish people from the Netherlands to concentration and extermination camps. Deportation meant almost certain death, as most of those transported were sent directly to killing centers, such as Auschwitz. The Frank family understood this grim truth and knew that they needed to take drastic measures if they wished to survive. It was around this time that Margot Frank received a summons to report for a so-called labor camp in Germany. The family knew that this was not a genuine work assignment, but rather a one-way journey to a concentration camp. Otto Frank had been making preparations for such an emergency, and he had arranged a hiding place in the building where his business was located. The hiding place would later become known as the Secret Annex. This location was a concealed set of rooms behind a movable bookcase, accessible only to those who knew its existence. As the noose of Nazi persecution tightened around the Jewish community in Amsterdam, Anne was just 13 years old. She had recently been given a diary for her birthday, a small red and white checkered notebook in which she began to record her thoughts, observations, and dreams. What she could not have known at the time was that this diary would one day become one of the most famous and moving personal accounts of the Holocaust. With the German authorities closing in, the Frank family prepared to vanish from public life entirely and begin their life in hiding, cut off from the outside world, yet perilously close to it. The decision for the Frank family to go into hiding was not made lightly, nor was it a sudden choice born only from panic. It was the culmination of years of watching the noose of persecution tighten around them, and the growing certainty that remaining visible in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam would eventually lead to their arrest and deportation. Otto Frank, who was a pragmatic and forward-thinking man, had already begun preparing a secret refuge months before the family would need it. He understood the grim fate awaiting Jewish families who complied with Nazi orders, and he quietly sought out a hiding place that could shelter his loved ones for as long as necessary. The hiding place that Otto arranged was in the rear section of the building where his company, Opekta, operated. This space was not part of the official business offices and was concealed from the main part of the building by an unassuming bookcase that could be moved aside to reveal a hidden doorway. The rooms within this space were small, dimly lit, and had low ceilings, but they offered privacy and, most importantly, the potential to remain undiscovered. This section of the building would later become known to the world as the Secret Annex, a place that would serve as both a fragile sanctuary and a silent prison for Anne Frank and the others who lived there. The final push into hiding came on July 5, 1942, when Margot Frank, Anne's older sister, received an official summons from the Nazi authorities to report for labor duty. In Germany, the family knew very well that such summonses were a cruel deception, and that those who obeyed were deported to concentration camps, where survival was rare. Otto Frank immediately understood that they could delay no longer. The plan that he had carefully prepared was now their only option. On the morning of July 6, 1942, the Frank family left their home. They did not carry large suitcases or display any sign of leaving permanently, for such behavior could attract suspicion. Instead, they wore as many layers of clothing as they could manage, disguising their departure as an ordinary walk through the city. Anne later described in her diary how strange it felt to wear so many clothes in the summer heat, but it was necessary to avoid carrying visible luggage. The streets of Amsterdam were under constant surveillance, and a careless act could result in disaster. When they arrived at the Opekta building, they slipped quietly into the concealed back rooms of the Secret Annex. The space consisted of a few small rooms spread across multiple levels, connected by steep staircases. From that moment on, their lives changed completely. They could no longer go outside, walk freely in the sunlight, or interact openly with the outside world. The windows were covered to prevent any light from escaping, and they had to speak in hushed tones during the day, when workers were present in the main offices below. Shortly after the Frank family settled into the annex, they were joined by others seeking refuge. These included Herman and August van Pels, along with their teenage son Peter, and later, Fritz Pfeffer, a dentist. The group now numbered 8 in total, and the confined quarters became even more cramped. Despite the closeness of the space, they relied heavily on each other for companionship and survival. Daily life in hiding required strict routines to avoid detection. During working hours in the building below, no one in the annex could run water, flush toilets, or make loud noises that could betray their presence. Food and supplies were brought to them by trusted friends and employees of Otto's business, including Miep Gies, Johannes Kleiman, Victor Kugler, and Bep Voskujol. These helpers risked their own lives to keep the group hidden and provided them with not only food, but also news from the outside world. For Anne, entering the annex was the beginning of a new, claustrophobic existence. The vibrant, social life she had known before was replaced with quiet days of reading, studying, and writing in her diary. Through her writing, she began to capture not only the events within the annex, but also her thoughts, fears, and dreams, revealing a remarkable depth of insight for someone so young. The act of going into hiding marked a complete separation from the life the Frank family had once known. They had left behind their home, their friends, and all their possessions, trading freedom for the uncertain hope of survival within the narrow walls of the Secret Annex. Life inside the Secret Annex was a mixture of tense silence, rigid routine, and moments of quiet reflection. For Anne Frank, the experience was unlike anything she had ever known before. The world that had once been open and full of possibilities was now reduced to a few cramped rooms, shared with 7 other people. The walls of the annex were both a shield from the dangers outside and a constant reminder of the invisible prison in which they now lived. The space itself was small, with steep staircases, narrow passages, and rooms that had to serve multiple purposes. Privacy was almost impossible, as the residents lived in close quarters. Every sound carried, and even minor disagreements could not be hidden. The air often felt heavy and stale, as the windows had to remain covered to avoid the risk of being seen by anyone in the surrounding buildings. During the day, the residents had to remain exceptionally quiet because workers in the warehouse below could easily hear noises from above. This meant no running water, no loud conversation, and certainly no movement that could cause a floorboard to creak. The daily routine in the annex revolved around survival. The mornings and afternoons were the most dangerous times, as these were the hours when the warehouse was active. The group moved cautiously, speaking in whispers, and performing necessary tasks only when it was safe to do so. After the workers left in the evening, there was a small sense of relief, and the annex became more relaxed. They could speak in normal voices, prepare food without as much fear of being overheard, and sometimes even listen to the radio for news of the outside world. Anne Frank's days were filled with reading, studying, and writing. She treated her diary, which she named Kitty, as a confidante and poured into it her innermost thoughts, fears, and dreams. She wrote about the frustrations of confinement, the longing for freedom, and the complexities of the relationships within the annex. She also reflected on the events of the war as she heard them through the news, and the conversations of the adults, despite the grim reality around her. Anna's writing often revealed a remarkable sense of hope and a deep belief in the goodness of humanity, even in the darkest of times. The relationships among the residents were shaped by the stress of their circumstances. The Franks and the Van Pels family had different personalities, habits, and ways of dealing with fear, which sometimes led to tensions. Anne often found herself at odds with some of the adults, including her mother and Mr. Van Pels. Yet she developed a close friendship with Peter Van Pels. Over time, that friendship deepened into a quiet teenage romance, offering both of them some comfort and distraction from their confinement. The helpers on the outside, such as Miep Gies, Johannes Kleiman, Victor Kugler, and Bep Voskujol, were a lifeline for the annex residents. They risked arrest and execution to provide food, clothing, books, and news. Anne wrote with great admiration and gratitude for these individuals, recognizing the courage it took for them to continue helping despite the constant danger. There was an undercurrent of fear that never disappeared. Every unexpected sound from outside, every knock at the door, and every unusual activity in the street could cause a wave of panic. The threat of discovery was constant, and the residents lived with the knowledge that one careless mistake or one act of betrayal could mean their capture. At the same time, there were small moments of joy and normalcy. The residents celebrated holidays as best they could, shared meals together, and occasionally found ways to laugh. Anne treasured these moments, writing about them as proof that even in hiding, life could still hold meaning. She dreamed about what she would do once the war ended, imagining herself as a writer or journalist, free to share her words with the world. The Annex was a place of survival, but it was also where Anne's voice began to take shape, a voice that would one day speak for millions who did not survive. The fragile safety that the Frank family and their companions had built inside the Secret Annex came to a sudden and devastating end in the summer of 1944. For more than 2 years, they had managed to remain hidden, relying on the loyalty of their helpers and the discipline of their daily routines to avoid detection. However, the ever-present fear of discovery finally became a reality on the morning of August 4, 1944, when Nazi authorities stormed the building. The events of that day marked the beginning of the end for the residents of the Annex. The exact circumstances that led to their betrayal remain a subject of historical debate. Some historians believe that an anonymous tip reached the Gestapo, possibly from someone who had knowledge of the Annex or had noticed unusual activity around the building. Others suggest that the arrest may have been connected to investigations into illegal labor or ration card activities involving employees in the warehouse below. Whatever the cause, the result was the same: the group's concealment was exposed, and their carefully maintained secrecy was shattered in an instant. On the morning of the raid, the Annex residents were going about their cautious daily routine when they heard unfamiliar footsteps and voices in the building. Armed officers of the Sicherheitsdienst, the Nazi security service, accompanied by Dutch police collaborators, entered the premises and quickly discovered the hidden entrance behind the bookcase. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. The residents had always known that such a moment could come, but the reality of it was no less terrifying. The officers ordered everyone in the Annex to gather their belongings and come down from their hiding place. There was no time to take anything of value or sentiment. Anne's beloved diary and her other writings were left behind on a desk, where they would later be found and preserved by MEPGs. The residents were taken into custody without resistance, as any attempt to fight back would have been futile and would have placed their helpers in even greater danger. After their arrest, the 8 residents of the Annex were transported to the headquarters of the Sicherheitsdienst on Utrechtstraat in Amsterdam for interrogation. From there, they were held at an Amsterdam detention center before being transferred to the Westerbork transit camp in the northeastern Netherlands. Westerbork served as a temporary holding facility for Jews before they were deported to extermination camps in German-occupied Poland and other territories. Life in Westerbork was harsh and dehumanizing. The residents of the Annex, once hidden away from the outside world, were now thrust into the brutal reality of the Nazi camp system. Yet, Compared to the horrors that awaited them further east, Westerbork was only the beginning. On September 3, 1944, Anne Frank, her family, and the others from the annex were placed on the very last transport train ever sent from Westerbork to Auschwitz. This deportation marked the point from which there was little hope of return. Upon arrival at Auschwitz, the group was separated. Men and women were divided, and further selections were made to determine who would be sent directly to the gas chambers and who would be forced into slave labor. Otto Frank was separated from his wife and daughters at this point and would never see them again. Edith, Anne, and Margot were assigned to the women's barracks, where conditions were appallingly overcrowded, unsanitary, and dangerous. Disease, starvation, and violence were constant threats, and the prisoners endured forced labor under the watchful eyes of guards, who treated them with cruelty and contempt. After several weeks in Auschwitz, in late October 1944, Anne and Margot were transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. The camp was plagued by disease outbreaks, particularly typhus, which spread rapidly among the malnourished and weakened prisoners. Bergen-Belsen was not an extermination camp like Auschwitz, but the appalling conditions meant that death was an almost daily occurrence. It was here that Anne and Margot would spend the final months of their young lives, far from the home they had once known, and far from the diary that would one day carry Anne's voice to the world. The legacy of Anne Frank's diary is one of the most profound and far-reaching in modern history. What began as the private thoughts of a young girl, recorded in a simple checkered notebook, has become one of the most widely read and impactful books in the world. The diary's journey from the desk of the Secret Annex to global publication is a story of resilience, remembrance, and the enduring power of words. After the arrest of the Frank family and their companions in August 1944, the Secret Annex was left abandoned. In the immediate aftermath of the raid, Miep Gies and Bep Voskugil, two of the trusted helpers, who had risked their lives to keep the group hidden, entered the annex to salvage what they could. They found Anne's diary, along with her loose writing scattered across the floor. Understanding the value of these documents, though perhaps not yet the full historical importance, Miep gathered them and kept them safe, with the intention of returning them to Anne when she was freed. That moment never came. After the war ended in May 1945, Otto Frank returned to Amsterdam as the only survivor from the Secret Annex. The news of his wife Edith's death reached him, followed by confirmation that both of his daughters, Margot and Anne, had perished in Bergen-Belsen. The grief was immeasurable. For Otto, the diary became both a tangible connection to his lost child and a testament to her spirit. When Miep Gies gave him Anne's writings, he began to read them and discovered the depth, maturity, and insight contained within her words. In those pages, Otto encountered not only the record of daily life in hiding, but also Anne's reflections on human nature, her hopes for the future, and her belief in the possibility of goodness, despite the horrors surrounding her. She wrote of her dreams of becoming a writer or journalist, unaware that her words would eventually reach millions. Otto understood immediately that her diary was something that needed to be shared with the world, both as a memorial to her and as a warning about the consequences of hatred and intolerance. With the help of friends and contacts, Otto worked to prepare the diary for publication. He made careful decisions about which entries to include, sometimes omitting passages that were deeply personal or that revealed private tensions within the annex. The first edition of the diary, published in Dutch in 1947 under the title Het Achterhuis. The Secret Annex quickly drew attention in the Netherlands. Its reception was deeply emotional, as readers found themselves confronted with the war's impact through the voice of a young girl who might have been their neighbor, classmate, or daughter. Over time, the diary was translated into dozens of languages and published in countries around the world. It became a cornerstone of Holocaust education, studied in classrooms, and read by individuals across cultures and generations. For many people, Anne's story served as a first, deeply personal introduction to the realities of the Holocaust. Her voice, unfiltered and deeply human, allowed readers to connect with history, not through statistics or political speeches, but through the lived experience of one individual. The Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, established in 1960, became a museum and educational center dedicated to preserving the memory of Anne and the other victims of Nazi persecution. Visitors from all over the world walk through the preserved rooms of the Secret Annex, imagining the lives of those who once lived there in silence and fear. The museum stands not only as a memorial, but also as a call to action against discrimination, hatred, and oppression in all forms. The diary's influence has also extended into literature, theater, and film. Stage adaptations have brought Anne's words to audiences who may not have read the book, and numerous documentaries and films have sought to tell her story to new generations. Her name has become synonymous with the innocence lost during the Holocaust, and her diary remains one of the most widely read works of nonfiction in the world. Anne Frank's writings continue to resonate because they speak to universal human emotions: fear, hope, longing, and the search for meaning in the face of suffering. They remind readers that history is not only a collection of events, but also the sum of countless personal stories, each with its own tragedy and significance. Through her diary, Anne has achieved the future she dreamed of, her voice echoing across decades, warning against the dangers of prejudice and inspiring the pursuit of justice and understanding for all people. The story of Anne Frank stands as one of the most enduring and deeply human narratives to emerge from the tragedy of the Holocaust. Through her diary, the world has been given an intimate window into the life of a young girl whose dreams, fears, and reflections were shaped by extraordinary circumstances. Her words preserve the reality of life in hiding, the suffocating fear of discovery, and the small moments of hope that persisted even in the darkest times. They remind us that behind every historical event are individuals with their own voices, aspirations, and humanity. Anne's diary is more than just the account of a single life cut short. It is a universal testament to resilience, moral courage, and the importance of bearing witness. It continues to speak across generations because it embodies the timeless truth that hatred and prejudice must be challenged wherever they appear. Otto Frank's decision to share his daughter's writings ensured that her voice would not be silenced by the forces that sought to destroy her. In doing so, he allowed the world to see not only what was lost, but also what can be preserved through memory and education. The lessons of Anne Frank's life and words are not confined to the past. They are a call to action in the present, urging us to recognize the signs of injustice, to protect the vulnerable, and to defend the dignity of every human being. In the face of division and intolerance, her voice urges us to build bridges of understanding and compassion. The diary remains an enduring reminder that even in times of unimaginable cruelty, the human spirit has the capacity to hope, to dream, and to believe in the possibility of a better future.